Hey everyone, my name is James and welcome to the SIG patch note review. We're here with 13.23 and let's dive into it. So the first change is the Riot ID change. So we're moving away from summoner names and instead using Riot IDs. Obviously there's been some discussion about this one. I think it is pretty interesting. Long term, it's probably pretty good for the game, but it won't be any gameplay changes. So moving on to the champions. We have Azir up first, and this change I actually really like. So they're basically moving the kind of passive guaranteed damage down on his W, but making the on-hit effects apply to his W as well. So this is really going to be a buff to items like Raid's Blade, Kraken Slayer, Hurricane, which could create some really interesting builds. So I think overall probably not a big change in power level, but kind of exciting, and I'd love to see what builds Azir can be played with now. Moving down to Briar, obviously very strong, as anyone that has been playing solo queue knows. Definitely needed some nerfs, and so I think they're tackling primarily the health here, which is always 20 health. It seems pretty minor, but it actually ends up being quite a big deal in the tight skirmishing scenarios. And then they're also nerfing her W as well by moving down the percent per bonus AD on the missing health. Pretty needed nerfs. I don't think this will be enough to really put her in the ground, but I think this might get her a little bit under control. Draven next. It's a pretty good change. Quality of life. There is going to be a few scenarios where this gets you an extra kill, but for the most part, it doesn't really change the gameplay or how you play around him. With Janna, she obviously had some changes last patch, and it seems like they missed the mark a bit. So it's good to see them going back and buffing her up a bit. I think right now they're talking about how she's a bit weaker in the early game than they thought she would be. And my read on the reason for that is that they pushed her into a role where she has to be active in the early game. And Janna players aren't used to being active in the early game because they've just played a couple of months on a patch where she should be AFK. So I think these changes are probably a little too much. I expect that we'll see, some really good Janna players pop up in solo queue and really dominating the lane. So I'm excited to see it, and I think these are good changes, but I think they might be a little too overtuned. So if you do like Janna, I would say now's a great time to start playing it. Next up, we have some Jarvan nerfs. So they're attacking the cooldown on his Q. I think this is a great change. I love Jarvan. I play a bunch of Jarvan, he's my most played, but he's definitely just too mobile, too CC focused, too damage focused, too sticky. And I think the cooldown on the Q is the best way to tackle this because it doesn't change the core gameplay, which is so fun, but it definitely makes it harder for him to go in and out so easily and get so much disruption in a team fight. Next up, Cassante. Obviously everyone's favorite champion to see nerfed, and happy to say these are pretty big nerfs. I think generally the one that I like the most here is the mana cost change on the Q. I think Cassante is a champion that has too many tools and doesn't really have to think too much about how to use them. And so just adding a more opportunity cost, almost doubling the mana cost at level 1 of his Q, it's going to make it harder for him to sustain trade without thinking about it in lane. So that's a direction I really like. They're also just nerfing the Q damage in general, and also nerfing his R all in at level 6. So now you don't have to be really scared when Cassante hits 6. You can maybe fight him if you're in a good condition or have a good 1v1 champion. So overall, really happy with these changes and excited to see how they play out. Next up, we have Neferi. So I think I really like the comment they had here. They basically said, oh, she's a relatively easy to play assassin. And I really like that they are trying to retain that gameplay and just doing some flat numbers nerfs here. Obviously, not the most fun. It's always more interesting when there's different ways that they alter the gameplay, but I think the numbers nerfs are the best way to tackle this because I think the kit is playing pretty well. Most people are happy even when playing against her, so I think that's a good sign. With Riven here, one of the big topics right now is how she plays and how weak she is and how strong she is. Personally, I think these changes aren't really on the mark for me. They're basically just giving her more power. Maybe you could argue it could be needed, but unfortunately, I think more power doesn't really solve the core problems with this champion. And so we're just going to see that people who play only Riven are now slightly better, and the people who don't play Riven still can't play Riven. So I don't love these. It could be not too big a deal. They're not massive, but I would be concerned about the impact of these. And I think generally it's not really achieving the goals that I think Riven should be aiming for. With Trundle next, not really big changes here. Minor attack damage growth, minor Q, mana cost nerf, well, quite a significant key mana cost nerf. So I do think this makes the lane Trundle better, which is always fun. You know, I do like when they take the more niche styles of play and they throw some love their way. I think the one thing for me is that I'd be on the lookout for a late game kind of split push Trundle, like a hard ID item scaling, maybe Trinity Force, you know, maybe some crit, Hullbreaker. I'm just concerned over how quick can he split push, and it could be a little too much. So I'd be on the lookout for that. But most likely this is not too impactful in your games. Finally, there's some Vel'Koz changes, and I think this one is pretty good. Vel'Koz is generally a little weak right now, and just, you know, buffing up the damage and the AP scaling on its passive, I think always going to be pretty good. I don't think anyone's going to argue about this change. And then some Ziggs nerfs. So Ziggs, pretty safe, too safe, and I think it's good to take down his damage a little. You know, the one thing that I will say here is that there's no gameplay changes here, so it's just going to be a Ziggs that hurts a little less. But I don't know how much this changes where you would pick him or wouldn't pick him, since it's kind of binary, right? He's slightly weaker in lane because he can't escape as often with his W. He's slightly weaker in the early game and mid-game fights because less Q damage, but still, like, if you're going to be picking Ziggs and you're going to be doing all-in combo and poking from afar, I'm not sure this is changing where you'd pick him. Possibly with the Vel'Koz buffs above, there might be some scenarios where you look at Vel'Koz instead. But I think overall, pretty healthy changes for both champions. The final thing we're looking at is the turret gold adjustments. So I think these are, you know, pretty interesting actually. So they're trying to focus more gold onto the specific people that take the tower down and less onto the global aspect. And we'll tackle that change first. So I think that is a good goal in general. Now, back to what I said before about Trundle, like, I think Hullbreaker and some of the more split pushy champions have already been a little bit of a problem. And I think adding just a bunch of gold onto them and taking it away from their team when they're pushing like that it's a little scary. And then when it comes down to the inhib towers, I do like this change. So back to the point I just had about split pushes. The problem with split pushing is that it's too often too risky to try and push all the way and take the inhib tower. Because the inhib tower it's not very tanky. So if you win a team fight, you can probably just take it anyway for free. But if you go all the way up to their base, they can maybe come through mid lane, they can come through the jungle, they can come out their base with home guards. Like, it is very scary to be pushed up that far as a split pusher, and it's usually not worth the risk. You know, previously the local goal was 50, which is less than a cannon minion. So I do like they've added a lot more gold into there, but still pretty scary. It's a lot more power that could be in these split pushers, and with some of the buffs and item buffs that we've had over recent patches, I could see that being a problem. Okay, so thank you so much for watching. That's my recap of patch 13.23. I hope you found this helpful. Be sure to comment and let us know. And one last thank you to SIG for helping make this happen. I'll leave you with one thought. I think there's 3 skins being added this patch. I think Beastcrank is going to be fantastic. Yeah, I really like the look of him. The chroma's really fun. And I love Blitzcrank, so excited for that. Thanks again.